friends and listeners and watchers on YouTube. Welcome back to My Yoga Audio. I'm Megan, your host, and we are back with an interview with Porter Singer today. Porter is a musician, formerly known as Sirgun Kaur, and we became known to one another through a mutual friend, musician Joshua Stoddard, who was also a guest on this podcast in March of 2021. That interview with Joshua, along with some samples of his music, is one of the most listened to episodes in the 3 years I've now been doing this show. Porter and Joshua collaborated on several musical pieces together, and she and I became connected after Joshua took his own life last December of 2021 through a community that was expressing grief and memories of a beautiful soul gone far too soon. Porter is a singer, and she's an emotional guide, the host of the Inspired Artist podcast, where she interviews spiritual creatives, and she is the founder of the Body Cello Method. Porter, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
It's been great to connect sort of in person, virtual, in person after so long of just like messaging one another. And I've been following your work in music for some time. So I'm a little starstruck at the moment.
Well, it's funny how this does feel in person now, doesn't it?
We get so used to meeting on Zoom. When we meet in person now, it's super awkward. I feel like but it's been amazing to have you here. And I wanted to ask you before we kind of dove into anything, and we don't have to dwell on it, and I have so many questions I want to ask you, but first, given that we were connected through Joshua initially, and we've just passed the anniversary of his leaving us, and I know you've interviewed him extensively, he's been on this show, is there anything you would want to say about him, about what happened, or about your time together as friends and collaborators?
Wow. Well, I have this, it's actually staring at me as we're doing this, because I went to his memorial in Oregon, in Portland, a few months ago, I guess. Oh, it's a blur as to when that actually was, but yeah, Joshua was like no other being that I have ever met. And left in a way that no other being I have known has ever left me before. I think I now know a lot more about kind of what to look for when trying to be a support for someone who is thinking about taking their life. Because I really didn't know what the signs were. And I know a few of us talked about that at his memorial. But he wasn't just unique in the way that he touched my life in his leaving. He was unique in the way that he touched my life in his being. And one of the most remarkable things, I think, is just how much he did touch my life for the small amount of, real time that I actually spent with him. And I think it sounded like it was the same for you. I was only in his physical presence for 2 days in his actual life, but it felt like so much more than that because he was so good at keeping in touch. And, we were emailing and calling. And so, yeah, he was super special. And I feel so blessed to have been part of his journey on earth. And I still feel like he's with me. That's one of the perks of having him been in my life in that non-physical way anyway. He wasn't ever really in my physical presence on a daily basis, like I said. So I can interact with him not exactly the same way that I did when he was alive, but he sort of just feels like he's there, like he did feel when he was here. So, yeah.
No, I absolutely believe that. I have dreams where people will pop up that have, passed on. So he's definitely come through in dreams. And it was shortly before you and I had connected. It was like the last time that I saw him in a dream. And I know that kind of gets out there for some people, but I'm with you in that. I believe they're in different places, but are still with us in the ways that count. So thank you for that. I just wanted to have us take a breath on that, just because that was the way we became connected.
Sure.
Not needing to dwell on it if we don't need to. So I even though I introduced you formally at the start, I'm hoping you would kind of introduce yourself, how you want to be introduced right now in terms of who you are in this moment, what it is you think our listeners should know most of all about who you are and all that good stuff.
Ooh, well, I really liked the way you introduced me. That felt really good. Let's see how I would be known in this moment. Well, I think that over the past few years, it's been kind of a journey for me of it's sort of like, but I don't want to say it is like, but it's sort of like when you hit rock bottom. And because it's not like there wasn't like some cataclysmic event, but there were some things that happened in my life that forced me to sort of reckon with myself, and there continues to be. So I feel like I'm in kind of a process of letting go of a lot of stuff that I didn't even realize I was holding on to. That's for me personally. And so in my creative field, I'm kind of rediscovering what all that means to me. Part of the questions that I ask myself are like, have I been performing or sharing music because that was a coping mechanism to get people to like me as a child? Do I do it because I love it? And so all these things are kind of true, right? Like I think I placed importance on it because it felt good, but then there was also that feedback mechanism of, oh, people really seem to like this, so I think I'm asking myself a lot of questions right now. And it's it's kind of a lot, but it is what it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's the determining who you are in any given moment is a big challenge, right? Because we're always shifting, and different things change who. I don't know if I want to say change who we are, but change who we feel we are. There's somebody else I spoke to recently, and actually two people in the last couple of months who've been talking about like getting over people pleasing. And it's like we are kind of, there is something in us that is groomed for that, wanting to be accepted and wanting to be liked. And interestingly, Joshua said a similar thing when he came on. He's like, I've stopped. I don't want to call it sound baths. I don't want to call it healing, this or that. Like I'm making this music. I'm doing what feels good, and not trying to just do what I think people will like. And it's like, I think it's a constant struggle.
Yeah.
With all the things that we do, because we want things to be harmonious and we want everybody to be happy. And I don't think anybody wants people to not like them. Opposite of that is like, right. Making people like us. So thank you for that honesty and sharing that part. I guess part of what's fueling my next question is, there's so many things that are coming into my mind now, because you did an interview with, oh my gosh, is it Wendy Harris?
Oh yeah.
And it's one of the most profound interviews for me, those who are in the yoga community and specifically the Kundalini community. You really, both of you touched on so many things in such a kind, loving, forgiving, difficult, challenging way. And so I kind of wanted to weave into a little bit about the journey of who Porter Singer was, by birth, how she became Sirgun Kaur, and now has returned to be in name Porter Singer once more, and kind of what that means for your journey of who you are and the life you live. And
yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you liked that episode. Wendy is so lovely, and I don't completely remember what we spoke about, to be honest. I mean, I remember generally, but yeah, there's so many conversations that I have, but I do remember that her practice is, compassionate inquiry, and I really love that. But and then there's so many of so we had so many. Well, she delved so deeply into the practice that I ended up getting, into, even more so than I did, really, from a philosophical standpoint. So I guess I'll back up. But so my name has always been really important to me because my parents told me this story. It was like my foundational, story of who I was. It sort of made me feel like very important from a very early age, which was that my name, Porter, came from this dream that my parents simultaneously had when my mom was pregnant with me, not knowing that I was going to be a girl, but having dreamt of a girl child called Porter. And then they told me that when they looked it up, that it meant it was sort of like the right hand of God who would decide who went to heaven and who didn't, kind of thing. So it was like kind of a judging character, I guess. But I always felt like this was really important. And in a way, it was kind of like a spiritual name from the beginning. Yet I lived in France, and the word porter is pronounced porter, which means to carry. It's not a very attractive name in English either for a girl, in my opinion. It's not like Melody or Rose or something like uber feminine or something. So I always had a bit of a complex about my name growing up, and I think, and had wanted to change it like numerous times. So when I did discover Kundalini Yoga and this form that you could fill in on the 3HO website to apply for a new name, I was like, sign me up. That sounds great. And I'm thinking, I'm going to get something really beautiful. And then I get the name Sirgun, which I actually pronounce that way because that's how it's spelled, but it should actually have been spelled Sargun, and it should be pronounced Sargun, which means with the qualities, like the gunas, with the earthly qualities. So I was sort of in this situation again where I didn't feel like I had really a very feminine kind of name, but it was like, okay, it held meaning for me because the definition that I got was the embodies God, or the embodiment of God, or something like that, which sort of took me back to the original meaning that my parents had given me for the name Porter, which was interesting. So the names were actually quite important to me, and it took me a little while to decide that I wanted to formally shift my name, as in actually asking people to call me that. But thankfully, I was living in a community where everybody had a fake name anyway. I was living in Santa Monica, and everybody was doing yoga and their name was Shakti and Shiva and whatever. So that was not a very difficult transition. Getting my parents to call me a different name was a little, I had to ask for it as a Christmas present one year. And they did. They were, they were fairly accepting of it. But and ultimately I decided to go back to Porter in name, not on paper, because I actually legally changed my name to my new spiritual name, Sirgun Kaur. And now I have the added complication of having sort of brought my kids into it and given them this last name of Khalsa. And so when the shit hit the fan, let's say, and all these kind of negative stories came out about or let's say it was like a second or third wave, because it wasn't like it was the first time anybody had ever heard of this stuff about Yogi Bhajan, but it was the first time that I became aware of it in this big way, or that it seemed legitimate, or that I actually was able to put like faces to stories as opposed to just kind of like a rumor mill, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to even say it that way, because it's not like I heard all the stuff but discounted it. It was like, I heard like fragments of things, and it wasn't given any sort of credibility. Anyway, I think I've spoken about this before, but like the main thing that I was aware of was how poorly the children were treated. And I always just chalk that up to poor management. I didn't realize that it sort of went down the chain of command or up the chain of command, and that was kind of the directive that was being given by Yogi Bhajan, like that it was kind of an accident, but it wasn't. So anyway, when all this stuff started to come out, I was feeling very strange about continuing to keep that, that identity, because it had meant something very beautiful to me. And now it meant something, it's still, not that it changed the meaning, but it changed the background of it. It changed the framework for it and the reason for it. So I just decided, you know what? It was pretty scary, but I was like, I just don't want to keep using this, so I just decided to go back to Porter Singer. It was actually the first time I released music as Porter Singer, because when I released music before, I just used Porter. Yeah, which is I think a Mexican band, so there's a little bit confusion about that. So yeah, that was kind of scary, but it also felt really freeing. To go back to that. And I realized that so much of wanting to change my name had to do with kind of running away from parts of myself that I didn't want to look at. And I guess that brings me back to like your last question about just, being confronted. And that's what's happening. It's like none of the stuff actually went away. I just kind of put it aside for a little while. So yeah.
That's a journey. That is such a journey. But I also love that someone else has mentioned this on your podcast, and I'm sure you've heard it 1,000 times, that your like last name is Singer, and amazing singer, that you embody that. And the conversation you had with Wendy Harris, I love, because you were talking about, both of you at one point or another, the loss of community that came with, the realization of what had happened and what was coming out. And it's no longer this, like you said, this abstract rumor mill thing. This is something, impacting real life people, but still the way, we don't need to dwell on it because I don't want to be gossipy or negative, but a similar thing. I was like really involved with a pretty close-knit Kundalini community in Canada, in Toronto, Ontario, before I moved.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And
Nirmal.
What's that?
Nirmal?
No, Harinam Singh Khalsa.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you would have ever heard of him or not, because this is probably like 10 plus years ago. Because we've lived here for 9 years, and that was definitely over 10 years. And it's similar, and it's interesting. The day I was listening to your conversation with Dr. Wendy, I was out on this long walk. I was like, oh, I'm hearing these two people talk about, this kind of coming to terms, with something that was previously not known, and what that looks like personally, what that looks like in a community, and how a lot of people, and I've had several, I would say half a dozen conversations, some on this podcast and some just out in the world, with other yoga teachers who've become so disillusioned at one point or another about the quote unquote yoga world, that they stop teaching, or they stop, believing what they used to believe, because when that infrastructure, that framing, when everything they believed in kind of falls down, what are you left with? And I felt like the conversation you two had, and I won't get into it too much because I want people to go listen to it. I shared it on my stories and I'll share it again because I think the way you talked about it was like so human and so real, and really expressed the difficulties of how to wrestle with those things personally, but also as a community. And then
like, I have to go back and listen to this episode now.
so it was so good. I sent it to a few people. I was just like, you have to listen to this, just because I know they were other teachers who were struggling, reconciling like who am I in the yoga world after XYZ happens. And it doesn't have to be as severe, as some of the things we've heard. Sometimes the cards fall down for a lot less than that, but it still has this ripple effect in the community. And so, yeah, I just want to take a moment to thank you for having that honest conversation and recognizing that we all have, I'm trying to formulate like a blog post or maybe even another podcast episode where we talk about like what happens when we truly believe in something and then something we thought was true is not true. And how do we heal from that? How do we reconcile that? How do we move forward with our own belief system and stay true to our own values? And I sort of feel like from the little that I know of your journey, you're really doing that.
Yeah, well, something that really resonated with me was a guest that I had, Matthew Remski, who does a lot of research into specifically yoga cults. And he said that you keep what you created. And I really loved that because I don't think we need to just kind of go, okay, one part of this is bad, so I can't do any of it anymore. I stopped doing Kundalini yoga because I just lost interest. It was before all this happened. But if that practice had really meant something to me and it really helped me, I don't think that it would be right to just throw it away, because that's not honoring what I need. And it's not, if someone's out there, and they're still practicing Kundalini yoga, if that's something that gets you through your day, like you don't owe it to somebody else to trash that because, a part of it offended them or hurt them, because that's their work, right? And also, it's his response. It's like Yogi Bhajan was the one who did something wrong, not the person who practiced Kundalini yoga, So, but then there's a lot of, well, this reminds me of that, and so it doesn't feel as good as it used to, kind of thing. So there's just so many nuances. So I don't think that there's like a blanket right answer for anyone as to like, well, should I still do this? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a very individualized decision. And I liked how Wendy was talking about how she's like, I've done this particular thing every day for like decades. And now with that doesn't feel right to me anymore. So what do I find instead? And I love that she golf and bike riding and all the different things. Like it had such a lighthearted tone, like something that could be so heavy and is for very many people. But I love that approach. Anyway, I don't want to keep referring back to it.
Yeah.
I want people to listen to it. But then I'm kind of wondering, so I know you do work with emotional fluency and you have your Body Cello Method, which I love. I played string instruments when I was in middle school. So I'd love for you to tell us kind of more about what does that mean? How did you get started with this work? Like, what is that all about?
Well, I'll speak about Body Cello first, because that's what excites me the most, I think. So I saw this really cool performance at the Kitchen with this woman, Pam. I can't remember her last name, but her first name was Pamela, and she's this amazing experimental cellist. And I remember her saying that the cello is the instrument that has an identical range to the human voice. Okay, so that was sort of like in my, in my head. And when I decided to change my name and I was questioning whether or not I wanted to keep doing chant music and stuff like that, I really missed making sound. And so for me, it was like really kind of a basic thing, like just sounding through, like making sound through my body. Like I missed that. And mantra gives you an excuse to do that, you know? Singing gives you an excuse to do that, but people don't feel as uninhibited and like worthy of singing because they have judgments about their own voice. And then to a lesser degree, maybe some people have a little bit of inhibition about mantra singing because they also don't like their voice. But I've never heard anybody hum and say, "Oh, I sound so bad." Right? So I was sort of conscious of like how I would be sharing this with other people, but at the same time, like wanting to create something for myself. So I created a personal practice that I would say is sort of influenced by my experience with Kundalini yoga, honestly, because it has, in this sense, it has like different moments. There's like, you do this for a certain amount of time, you do this for a certain amount of time. Not that it's rigid, but like it's not a vinyasa sort of experience. It's more like a one exercise follows the next. And it's all breath work based. So you're taking a deep inhale and then you're sounding. It's very kind of hard for me to explain this practice because it's sort of like a combination of a yoga practice without needing to be like flexible or very skilled, a singing class without needing to be talented or like on pitch, you know, and also a breathwork class, but incorporating sound. So it's kind of a combination of all these things that I love. So you're moving your body, you're breathing, you're making sound. And what the sound does is it increases your breath flow, and the breath flow increases your sound. So there's this, this thing that I never really felt in like a vocal class, or, you know, if I've taken like a singing lesson, which I haven't taken that many singing lessons, honestly, but in my experience, you're told to breathe from your diaphragm, but it's not a breath practice. So you're not encouraged to take like a full deep breath and then make the sound when you're ready. It's more like you need to fit that breath into the song. So it's a different thing. So one of my favorite body cello practices is what I call an intentional tantrum, where you just kind of lay on the floor and you bang your feet and your hands and you breathe deeply, and then you vocalize through your lips. And it is so freaking relaxing. Like, especially if you're having, you know, like if you're really angry with somebody or you're just like really tense, it just lets you just get all that energy out without like taking it out on somebody else. So that's been kind of wonderful for me in my own practice, and I've really enjoyed sharing it. Yeah, so that's kind of body cello in a nutshell. And the emotional guidance thing has evolved. I'm now calling it emotional guidance because I actually discovered that emotional fluency is something that other people, it's like I thought I'd invented it because I'm bilingual. So I thought, what a cool idea to have like emotions be another language that I speak, but it's actually like a term, I guess, that other people use. So I was like, well, I don't want to like appropriate, you know, someone else's term because I'm not exactly sure how they're using that. But anyway, so I use emotional guidance now. But yeah, I think my journey with emotions has been, and so much about it's being illuminated, like so much more right now because of what I'm dealing with personally. But I've always had a lot of emotions. I'm very, very emotional. You're nodding your head, so I can tell this is something that you familiar with. And it's not been kind of encouraged, supported, or held by those who, you know, who cared for me growing up. And that felt very lonely. And it caused me for a long time to be asking the question, how can I be less emotional? And I believe like whatever kind of big question you're asking yourself at the time is sort of where you end up, you end up getting the answer to the question that you're asking. So I was asking myself, how can I be less emotional? And then Kundalini yoga comes into my life. Oh, wow. Like, this is great. There were so many kriyas for, being less emotional. If you're angry, just start chanting. And not that they weren't like wonderful, but I don't think that they were a good replacement for actually processing and like holding myself and like actually honoring my emotions. They were more a way to sort of distract from, or, well, I don't need to qualify it that way, but it wasn't exactly what I needed, because I didn't need to learn how to feel less. I needed to learn how to hold myself in my emotions, to honor myself when I'm feeling something, to be able to honor someone else when they're feeling something, And yeah, so I really love helping people see that in themselves, that they can make peace with their big emotions.
I love it. I love it so much. And what you don't know is that, yes, that person, like my teachers used to just be like, Megan, I'm going to say something to you. Don't cry. It was just like, that's just how I've been. And the previous guest who I just interviewed is talking about emotional fluency or emotional guidance for men. And I was saying to him, I was like, yeah, even though it's kind of derided for women, it's still more acceptable, quote unquote, than for men. And it's like we have such these like polar opposites sometimes. So he's like, I help men feel. They feel like they're not allowed to. They constantly have to be that stopgap between the women in their lives being overly emotional and them being, as a result, kind of suppressing and tamping down and not knowing how to deal with their emotions. And the way you just kind of paraphrased, everything that you experienced, which is like, it's no easy thing. And now in like the corporate world, that's one of the buzzwords of like emotional intelligence. And it's funny because I kind of feel like it shows up in different ways. I had as you know, that I do work corporately, and I had an incident, well, in November, this too, that I ended up coming down with COVID. Quite sick. And I probably should have taken more time off than I did, and went back, too soon, because I'm like, I'm fine, I can get back to work. And I was not ready. And then, was in this meeting. I didn't know what was going on. I'd missed all this information. It's first time in my entire life. I'm like turning 49 next month. First time in my entire life I started to cry in like it was on Zoom, but like in a corporate meeting. And it was just like, oh, and they could tell I kind of stopped it. I was like, I just need to step away for a minute, and and I was like having nervous breakdown, in the other room, like I can't believe that just happened. But another coworker came through and messaged me, and she's like, the brain fog is real. You are still healing. Like, give yourself a break. It's okay. Like, then everybody started messaging me. I'm like convinced I'm going to be fired, right? Back because I was so mortified. But that even those small little reach outs was so, I was just like, I'm so sorry. Like, that has never happened in my whole life. And they're just like, just take the time you need to like figure it out. And they're like, is there anything we're doing to like make you upset? Like, I could not believe the lengths that they went, to make me feel better. And so that was really validating. I don't think in any other workplace before now that would have necessarily been extended. And I sort of feel like our kind of global awareness of emotional guidance, emotional intelligence is kind of fueling that. At least I hope.
Yeah, man, we're talking, there's so many things. I mean, like the word empath did not exist, or even highly sensitive person didn't exist when I was growing up. There was no awareness that, you know, certain people are just more sensitive or, yeah. Anger is an interesting, oh, did I interrupt you?
Nope.
Anger is an interesting topic that I actually did a video on, because I think we call it an emotion when it's a man having anger. We don't really think of it as an emotion, right? But I don't think anyone's ever really angry in the way that we think about it. I think that there's like, it's sort of like a costume for emotions that are too inconvenient to express.
That's a good way. I'm not laughing at it. I'm just like, oh, that's fairly brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's so much cooler, right? For especially, I think actually for everybody, because I think we're moving towards more of like, you know, even women want to be perceived more masculine. It's like a much more powerful stance, right? That anger is such, feels so much more empowering, but it's actually so much more it's like a self-defense mechanism too, right? It just sort of covers your heart. It makes it so that nobody can get in. You know, if you're actually like disappointed or grieving or sad or something, nobody's gonna address that if you're yelling at them, you know? Which is, yeah. Yeah, but it's kind of a way that we learn to make our emotions appropriate. I think a lot of the time is just by,
yeah, socially acceptable, right? It's goes into like 3 places, and it's personal sides of stuff dealing with myself and my family in the last couple of years. I went into some therapy, and that was a big part of it, was like naming emotions. And I constantly go to like one of 3, and they're like, oh, but is it this or is it this? It's like, and realizing I don't think most of the world knows that there are all these different emotions that we can have that have names that represent different things and that we might be feeling. It's kind of like angry, sad, mad, you know, they all go there, but it's a little more complex than that when you're out in the big wide world. So when you do the body cello and emotional guidance with people, is that in a way kind of helping them to like swim through identifying some of that in their lives?
well, definitely the emotional guidance, because we're actually talking. Body cello is much more like a yoga class, in the sense that, I don't want to say it is a yoga class, but in the sense that you come, you do your practice and you leave. It's not like you're, I mean, sometimes we'll share, but it's not like a one-on-one kind of a coaching session, right? It's like a class. So if somebody does have an aha moment, then they might share, they might not, you know.
Do you do those? Is that something you do online?
I kind of put the body cello on pause live. Right now you can purchase the classes as like do on your own time kind of thing. So you get the videos and you can play them whenever you want. But before that, I was doing them live. I might start again. We'll see.
Okay, that's good to know. I was looking at your YouTube again today because I want to include you in my January newsletter and just links to different things. So I was like, oh, your music's on here and your like coaching's on there. So I'll provide the links, everybody who's listening, in the show notes, and keep an eye out for the newsletter, because I'll share all of that as well. And then you can get in touch with Porter for further ones. I wanted to go back to your music, if possible, because I think you've been singing or been in the like musical realm since you were a child. And do you sort of feel, maybe it sounds cliched, but it's kind of like, do you feel like music is your muse or your music's muse, or like what's that story between you in music?
Ooh, could you give me a little bit more on muse? What do you mean by that?
When I think of muse, I think of um, like artists, like a painter or a photographer, or somebody being like, oh, this person or this environment or this concept is my muse. And then kind of it's in tandem with me listening to your podcast, listening to your music, and thinking like just inquiry about your relationship to music, and in terms of like the muse and the artist, like how what's that relationship?
So this is my first attempt at thinking about it in this way. So thank you. Yeah, I like that idea of being a muse to music. That's sort of nice. It does honestly feel like the things that I have created were made by somebody else. Not like it's not me, but it's kind, I don't even know really how to explain that. Like it's not current me. It's like it happened and I took part in the drawing it down. Um, but I don't feel so like I don't feel like I own it. It's just it exists. I guess in the same way, I mean, you're a mom. Like you don't own your children and they have a life of their own now, but you did bring them here, you know?
Yes, like the not well, it's like the whole thing of non-attachment too, right? Like I love this music, or other artists or writers that I've had on the show, and they said something similar, more that they feel like they're kind of downloading or channeling something that's coming from a force greater than them that needs to be out in the world, and they're this vessel for that information, for that sound, for those words. There are like, yeah, some people who are like, they'll have sessions where they don't even recall anything, and they've written out things or sang things or said things that they don't even remember. And
Yeah.
I like to think of it as like a connection with the divine. And so that, like you said, like, I don't own this. This is, I guess you see yourself as a vessel coming out into the world and delivering.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can be a vessel for different things too. Like sometimes I'm a vessel for like trauma, and that's the song that I write. I just, it's like, want to get it out. That's actually part of I'm doing this songwriting series. I think by the time this gets out, I'm guessing we will kind of be in the middle of it, but I want to look at and kind of take people through a journey of using songwriting who aren't necessarily musicians. In fact, you don't have to be a musician at all, but to create something with your words, your ideas, your beliefs, with channeling, just drawing in doing it in different ways, like taking it from different vantage points and creating something that feels like a reflection of you at some moment in time, And I brought that up for a particular reason though, when you were talking about, but so for me, songwriting too, like when I write a song, I'm not necessarily writing it with the intention of sharing it. So much of what I write, in fact, most of what I write never sees the light of day because it's like writing in a journal, And then some of the songs I'm like, oh, I really like that. So I'll maybe somebody else would like that too. So yeah, it's sort of strange when what you do as a profession, I guess, and what you do for your own self-therapy kind of have this, this meeting point. Like, I don't really know what it's like to kind of have a job that's not like really personal, Yeah.
No, Yeah, it's just, I love hearing you talk about this and being unable in the best possible way to put it in terms that I think most people understand. Honestly, I mean, it's like looking for you my whole life for someone else who thinks I do, which is amazing. My husband's at the other end of the house. I should call him in here and be like, you need to be a partner. I'm not the person who thinks this way. It's, well, but even amongst all that, so like there's the artistic and creative and emotional work that you do, but you also have this amazing podcast, Inspired Artists Podcast.
Yes, I do that.
I've been enjoying listening to that so much. There's episodes, as I've already mentioned, that I really remember by name, and then there's others I can't remember the people's name, but I'm like, I remember snippets of their conversations, their journeys through life, and like, how do you know all these people? But it's through performing and going, you've just had these incredible.
Well, some of them I know, some of them I just reach out to and I'm like, hey, I have this podcast and I know who you are. Would you, you wanna?
Yeah.
And then some people are like, I actually have people, I don't know if this has happened to you, but I have these like services that now contact me and they're like, we think so-and-so would make a great guest on your podcast. So I don't know all of them. And that's, I love that about being a podcaster. I love meeting new people. Yeah.
Well, so far, all the ones I've listened to, you have a connection with people, which is how I kind of run things on here. But I started the beginning of your podcast 3 years ago and kind of I'm working my way up to where you are now. And I'm curious kind of like what have been I get a lot of questions from people who are starting out. And they're like, I want to launch a podcast, but like, how do you keep the momentum going? So there's all this stuff, but I want to ask somebody else. Like, I know you started pre-pandemic. I started during the pandemic, but you were pre-pandemic. Did that shift anything for you or like alter, the direction that you went in? And then how do you find, I always tell people, I just don't have enough time. I have more ideas than I have time to deal with. What is that like for you in terms of like hosting and producing a show?
Yeah, well, I think it took me a few years to kind of get into my groove with it because when I first started, I didn't really have like an idea of how many episodes I wanted to release each week or like what a comfortable workflow would be for myself. So now I've decided I'm releasing one a week and it's always on a Friday. And yeah, so that was really helpful for me to have some sort of structure as opposed to like, let's just see how many we can get out, So, and then I did do it pre-pandemic. I took a little bit of a break before I decided that I was going to be consistent. So I was consistent for a few years and then I went through a dark night of the soul and I took a little bit of a break and then I started again. And I don't know. I don't even know if I'm like doing it right, but I keep doing it and I really enjoy it. So I guess in that sense, I'm definitely doing it right because it's fun for me. Yeah, there's definitely been some, things that I've learned along the way and then I've just kind of adjusted to them. And I don't think there's any other way that I really could have learned besides just doing it. Because ultimately, hopefully, if you're starting out a podcast, it's something that doesn't yet exist. And so the framework for that is going to be unique to what you've just created. It's not like you could just replicate what somebody else did and be successful that way,
Yeah.
Which is again kind of it's like I don't know what it's like to have a job where it's not incredibly personal, and I don't know what it's like to have a job where you don't have to just like create everything from scratch because it's not like a straight road to, you need this degree and that degree and then you're all set kind of thing. So yeah.
Oh, you're like my icon for living I wanted to ask you, I know we chatted about this beforehand, but for listeners, for watchers, and I've probably mentioned this before, that one of my favorite other podcasts is a nonprofit organization called The Moth. And so for Christmas, I received this gift of a game of storytelling. So I love storytelling. That's partly why I do the podcast, because I want to interview people about their lives. And Porter has graciously agreed to be our first tester of drawing a card, which is like a prompt for a story, because I wanted to kind of have something that was, well, we're not that scripted actually today. I wanted to give you, hold on.
That's so fun. I actually just got I got a deck myself. I bought myself for Christmas too. I'd never had a deck before, and I really love decks now.
I probably have 3 or 4. I haven't gone into them for a while, but it's so fun. It's just nice to have something outside of you, and you kind of randomly pick this card from a deck of cards, and what does that reveal about you? Or dreams, like big believer in dreaming and looking up what the meaning of dreams is. So I drew a card for you while we were talking. I was just kind of shuffling the cards. So it's like a deep kind of ochre burnt orange card that says deep. Prepare a story about going in head first, diving down or digging in. Profound thoughts, long roots, endless love, intellectual debates, psychological excavations, lost at sea or in denial. It's time to sink or swim.
Ooh, so wow.
Yeah, tell us about a time you went all in, a time you were like a fish out of water, or a time you almost hit rock bottom.
Okay, I love it. Okay, so first, I'm gonna go with the first thing that came to mind. So when I, let's see, this was 2019. Yes, and my husband at the time had told me that he wanted an open marriage, and I was sort of shell-shocked, but I had been working with somebody, and we had been exploring limiting beliefs and things like this. So rather than just sort of go, no, thank you, or get mad at him or whatever, I was like, I wonder why this bothers me so much. And I decided to like explore that. And after a few months, I was like, you know what the hell? Like, let's do that. But what was funny was I didn't think I would be the one that would actually do anything. I was just sort of basically saying, whatever, if you want to go have some relationships, go do your thing. And I ended up going to this retreat with the guy that I had been working with. I'd been kind of an assistant coach basically to his program. Mm-hmm. And I met my current partner. And I remember this moment where he asked me a question, and I ended up telling him for the first time, when you decide to do something, but it's like really the first time that you speak it out loud where it really seems real. And I was like, because he asked me like about my ring, like was I married or something? And I was like, yeah, I'm actually in an open marriage. And the moment I said that, I was like, oh my God, everything is about to change. And it did. So I think it was like 3 months later, I moved everything, my kids, everything that would fit into my minivan to Washington from Arizona. And here I am.
You did go all in.
I went all in.
Oh my goodness. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty big. Big change. Oh, amazing. Thank you for being so willing to be a part of that story. I don't know if you're like how the mood strikes you. I was gonna ask you whether it's live or like something pre-recorded, and I can also like send people to YouTube and Spotify to listen to your work, but I don't know how you're feeling about potentially singing something or delving more into your practice, whatever, however that might be defined.
You mean like share something right now?
Mm-hmm.
I was working on just some vocalizing yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be appropriate?
Yeah, honestly.
Okay. Let's see how it reads, because sometimes harmonium can be a little strong for the audio that we have available.
It's true.
But let's see. You can call this take one, and I can try something else if this doesn't. Was that super loud?
I mean, I don't know how it's going to translate in the end, but it was so beautiful to hear now with that. And like the emotion that came before that and your vulnerability of, you know, talking about something very personal to you. So it just felt like you needed to take a breath in a way that would maybe feel good to you to release that. And I know it feels good for me. I hope it does I told you I'm crying.
I love you. This is so great. I could tell when we start talking, I'm like, I have a new friend.
I know. And I don't know. Well, I'll say this now because I don't know how it's going to turn out on Zoom. Zoom is great for connectivity, but they're not as like
Yeah.
audio and video, superb as other platforms. So go visit the YouTube link. Go visit the Spotify link to hear Porter's voice in the real, sort of outside this moment, just in case. I'm not sure how that will transform through. But for any of you who've been in my yoga classes in the last like 12 years, I've definitely played her music, so you'll know her voice and her sound. And I want to encourage you to stream and download. Actually, if you sign up for her newsletter, I discovered that in signing up for your newsletter, there's a download of an album there. So that was a lovely gift. But yeah, where is the best place for and I'll put links in the show notes, but you just let us know what's the best way for people to kind of find you and connect with you and figure out about your songwriting course and any other offerings you have available.
Yeah, so portersinger.com is probably the best way to find out all about me. I have an empty events page right now. I have a very full music page where I have downloads and I do harmonium chord sheets for people who are wanting to play some of my music on their own harmonium. I have a guidance page for body cello and emotional guidance offerings. And then I also started a community tab where you can sign up for the January songwriting series. And I'm also going to do something in March on money and mantra.
Oh, I'm very intrigued by that. That's one of the conversations that comes up a lot with like other yogis and practitioners and artists, frankly, too, just in general. It's sort of like, I'm doing this thing that I love, but they feel this thing about the money that's associated with it. And yet we have no compunction about going to a 9-to-5 and taking money for that. But so I'm sure yours is that's gonna be good.
Yeah, I like teaching about money. I like learning about money too. So I like to share what I've gleaned.
Yeah, with the world. What's on your kind of, as we close out, your sort of thoughts, hopes, visions, predictions for 2023 for you and beyond, depending on kind of what your heart is telling you right now?
Well, my vision for, let's start with myself, for next year is to care deeply about how I am doing and what I need in any given moment, and to unwind myself from this pattern of hyper awareness of what other people what my perception of what other people are needing at any given moment and their opinion of me. And then I think on a more global scale, I think my vision is for us to be able to communicate in a more harmonious way, to be able to see more of our shared attributes and less of our divisive opinions on things, to be able to find more common ground with our fellow humans, and hopefully, I want to use a better word than hopefully, but my prayer is for that to mean that we are able to come together and support each other so that there is less loneliness, despair.
Yeah. Seeing one another.
Yeah.
hearing one another. I was in a store. It's a couple days before New Year's Eve. This will come out in a couple weeks, but I was in a store about a week and a half ago, and there was a guy that was going around, and he was really just talking to anybody who would listen to him, like, what are your plans for Christmas? Are you making a special recipe? What are your traditions? But it was like freaking people out, right? And then they'd be like, he'd start following them up the aisles, and then he'd ask another person when they ran away and whatever. And I was like, oh, like, he just really wants to connect with someone. And I know in a department store, that's not the best place to do it, but it was like, I could feel that real human need to, have a connection with somebody. Yeah. So I feel like that's the aim of this podcast. And I feel like it's the aim of your podcast too, and the work that you do to just facilitate more connections between so many different types of people. And I want to reiterate that to listeners, to go give her podcast a listen, because I've been blown away. I've been fascinated. I've been intrigued. I've been like, what the heck is going on? Like, people are just, you know what I mean? Their range of experiences and the things they do. I can't remember his name, but there's this one guy, and he's played violin with Rihanna, but I can't remember his name for some reason.
That was on my podcast?
Yeah, he's a musician. Or viola. Might not have been violin, it might have been viola. But he's played with
Rihanna.
With Rihanna, and with who was the other one? Oh, India.Arie, who I've seen in concert here and was amazing. And I'm like, was he at that concert that I saw? But anyway, that whole interview was like, he was such an interesting person, and his approach to life and going all in and having this very magical childhood. I should pull it up on my...
Oh my gosh, who is this? I don't know who this is.
Gosh. But it had been like 10 years since you two had seen one another. Inspired. I'm looking it up. I have to go like way back. Oh, and I like the interview with Gary Temple Bodley too.
So that's who I was coaching with.
Yeah. It was... Bear with us, friends, because...
Oh, Asher Lob?
Oh, the other Deepak.
Oh, Deepak Ramapriyan. Yeah.
That was just like, I was like walking, stopping and be like, what did he just say? And I'd have to like back it up, because it's magical childhood, but then he just like, he's full throttle, like 380% of the time, and like, but in the most charming way. But anyway, just such a cast of characters on your show. But it's like, I love that, because I feel like we talked about his experiences growing up and how kids were just sort of like, okay, he's this like whatever. And we've all had those experiences of feeling like an outsider, and nobody hears us, sees us, or listens to us, but look at what he's accomplishing in life. And I feel like there's always somebody on there that we can connect with. That's why I love the Moth too. Like when I was pulling out these cards, because when I listen to those stories, it's people from every walk of life, and they could be talking about the simplest thing, the funniest thing, the saddest thing. And yeah, I feel like that's our purpose here, is to keep connecting with one another. So thank you for being part of that.
Yeah. Thank you, Zoom.
No, right? For allowing us to do this, and
fantastic
connection despite being farther apart. So listeners, I want to encourage you to go ahead and follow Porter Singer on Instagram and check her out on YouTube. Oh my gosh, such beautiful music, as well as on Spotify and all your streaming platforms. She'll be included in this month's newsletter with all those links there as well. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me, myyogaaudio@gmail.com. I would love to hear your feedback on this episode and anything else that comes across your mind that gets prompted from some of our conversations. And remembering that it's always a great time for your mind and your body to be on the mat.